NFL teams do you need to bet on at the start of this NFL season? What's going on, football fans? It's Mitch here, back with another NFL video. And in this video, the most mispriced, undervalued NFL teams that can make you some money this season. Gronk, spike the like button, subscribe for more NFL betting and fantasy content here on OwnersBox Fantasy. These are the 8 most mispriced teams at the beginning of the NFL season, breaking down the first month for each team, beginning with the heavily hyped Houston Texans. And I know that sounds weird. The Texans, they're not undervalued, but they're definitely underrated in comparison to their schedule. They start the season with the Indianapolis Colts at home, a team that's starting Anthony Richardson, who's barely started at the NFL level, and they have one of the worst secondaries in the league. This is CJ Stroud with all his weaponry, healthy to start the year, at home, in that atmosphere. The Texans should pass all over the Colts and win this game. Then they play the Chicago Bears. They're getting Caleb Williams very early in his career. So that's back-to-back very young quarterbacks where even CJ Stroud has much more experience than both of these quarterbacks on the other side. They play once again at home to start the season in week 2. They're minus 3.5, which does feel a little dicey in comparison to the Colts game, but this is not a divisional game. So that's something to consider. I would also say that the Bears' weakness on offense is their offensive line. The Texans' strength on defense is DeMeco Ryans' complex scheme for a rookie quarterback to break down, and their pass rush of Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, which is going to give Caleb a lot of issues considering their athleticism up front. So I really like the Texans here to take care of business against the rookie quarterback. Then they play the Vikings in Minnesota, a team that's probably projected to be the worst team in their division. The Texans are on the road for this one, -4. But I still think they're more than a touchdown better than the Vikings. If the Vikings are a bottom 10 team in your power rankings and the Texans are a top 5 or 6 team in your power rankings, it would only make sense that the Texans go to a dome environment, nothing too crazy, take on Sam Darnold and punish the Vikings. Then in week 4, this is probably the most dicey bet out of all of these games. The Texans do play once again at home. So 3 out of the 4 are at home, which I really love here. But they do play Jacksonville, which is a divisional foe. And in my opinion, the most competitive divisional foe. Trevor Lawrence is experienced. Doug Peterson is a good coach. So it won't be easy, but the Texans are at home and they are the more talented team. And this is a chance for a statement game, especially from the Texans defense that has a clear advantage against Jacksonville's offensive line. So I like the Texans in games where they're not favored by more than 4 points at the start of the NFL season, and 3 of the games are at home. 2 of the games are against really inexperienced quarterbacks, and the other is against Sam Darnold. So, I mean, they should start 4-0. I would be genuinely surprised if they were any worse than 3-1. And I'd consider them to cover all of these games. The next team that I believe is mispriced at the beginning of the 2024 NFL season is the Cincinnati Bengals, a team that I'm also very high on in the AFC this year. The Bengals do have a tricky point spread in week 1. They are asked to cover a 9.5 point spread in New England. This is just fundamentally not a great bet. But if there is a team that you want to fade in week 1, it might be the Patriots. That's my favorite team. And they don't have an offensive line. They're probably going to start their second best quarterback, Jacoby Brissett. Their playmakers are not experienced in this system. There's just not a lot to like about the Patriots to start this season. Meanwhile, Joe Burrow is motivated. This Bengals team has a lot of cohesion and chemistry, and they could just lay the smackdown on the Patriots in a sunny New England. It won't be cold. It won't be snowy yet in Foxborough. So the Bengals winning by 10 is not unreasonable. Definitely. Week number 2, they go to Kansas City. They get a 3 and the hook, a field goal and a half against the Kansas City Chiefs, and they always play the Chiefs well. This is going to be a close game, and I wouldn't be shocked if the Bengals won this game, considering Joe Burrow has only lost to Patrick Mahomes one time. The Bengals have the Chiefs number, and even last year in 2023, without Burrow, they played the Chiefs really, really well. So I actually will be betting the Bengals here with more than a field goal, pretty much in any game they play this year, but definitely in this game against the Chiefs. In week 3, they play at home on Monday Night Football against a rookie quarterback, Jaden Daniels, a very bad offensive line, and just a team that I don't think is going to be any good, the Washington Commanders. They're favored by 6.5, maybe 7 at the most. They're going to punish the Commanders. It's a big game. It's a spotlight Monday Night Football matchup. There's just no way the Bengals don't show up in a massive way. I don't think the Commanders can cover the Bengals. I don't think they'll get a pass rush on Burrow. It's a bad matchup. Then they play the Carolina Panthers in Carolina, and they're -6. They're only -6 against the team that was the worst in the NFL last year that won 2 games by a field goal each at the very end. Like, the Bengals are going to make the playoffs. I think they're going to win the AFC North. They should take care of this team. They should easily beat the Panthers, like easily. So 6, I don't think it's going to be that once we get to week 4, because I think the Bengals will be 3-0. But I mean, if you can bet it now, it's probably a pretty great bet. So I just feel like the Bengals are not priced in the contender ship that they should be priced at entering 2024. The third mispriced NFL team entering 2024 is the Philadelphia Eagles. I actually am going to stay away from their first game, and I'll mention why a little bit later. They play the Packers in Brazil. It's a weird matchup. It's a weird environment, and there's a lot unknown here. So that's one game that I don't love. But the other 3 are games that I would bet. The Eagles take on the Falcons in week 2, and especially if they lose this game and Atlanta beats the Steelers, Atlanta will probably be closer to an even point spread here. But the Eagles, -3.5, I think they just always own Kirk Cousins. They're at home for the first time in the Link, which is always tough on Kirk Cousins. He always plays terrible there. I don't really know why, but he does. The Falcons defense will be truly tested at all 3 levels by a dynamic Eagles offense that should be able to push them around all over the field. And then on defense, I don't really see where the Eagles will be overwhelmed. Like the Falcons, they have Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan out of the backfield, maybe catching the football, but I don't think they're going to have a huge issue here slowing down Cousins outdoors where he typically struggles. It's a dome team going outdoors. It's the Eagles' home game, first of the year. I just think that environment is going to be real hype. And I think the Eagles are going to be tough to beat in that environment. So I definitely bet the Eagles there, but I would wait on this one for sure. The Saints and the Bucs in New Orleans and in Tampa Bay the following 2 weeks. And they're only favored by a field goal each. Now, they did get hammered by the Bucs in the playoffs last year, but that's all the more reason to bet on the Eagles. They did hammer the Bucs in Tampa during the regular season last year, and I do believe that Kellen Moore has an edge on Todd Bowles in recent matchups. Think back to that Cowboys game in 2022 when they took on the Bucs in the playoffs. Remember how good that game plan was? That was Tom Brady's final game in the NFL. You might recall that game, but I do think that Kellen Moore is the decisive edge here, on top of the Eagles defense just not being a complete disaster like it was in the playoffs. So I think that result is closer to the game that we saw in the regular season of 2023 and not the postseason. And then the Saints, who I just don't think are a good team. Like, yeah, it's in New Orleans, but I think the Eagles are much better on the offensive line and much better on the defensive line than the Saints. I also think that the Saints typically have struggled with Jalen Hurts and the mobility of a quarterback. So I think that could be a big issue. And Saquon has also played really well against the Saints in his history. So the Eagles are just a much, much more talented team than the Saints, the Bucs, and even to a degree, the Falcons. The only game I would stay away from is the Packers. Speaking of the Packers, they're my next undervalued team, which is why I didn't want to bring them up. Because if I were forced to bet on a team in that Brazil game, I would take the Packers in that game plus points. Because I actually believe the Packers are the better team and they're getting points in a neutral site. So maybe the Eagles have more experience, But what the Packers have is they have a more cohesive offense in terms of Saquon's new to the Eagles, no Jason Kelce, Kellen Moore's first game with the Eagles. So there's some things the Eagles have to figure out. The Packers don't. They have Matt LaFleur, Jordan Love, same receiving core, same guys. Josh Jacobs is new, but he's a running back. Okay, whatever. The defense, I actually think will be underrated entering the year, so I'm excited for that. But honestly, like the Packers, their speed, their ability to attack you through the run, and then the horizontal play action passing game, I think it's going to give the Eagles linebackers a lot of issues. So I actually would lean towards the Packers in that Brazil matchup, but it might be a stay away for most people. Then is really where you get going with the Packers. They play the Vikings at home, -5. 5 is kind of a dead number. It looks a little scary, but it really doesn't mean anything. I honestly think that the Packers should take care of this matchup by about 6 or 7, by at least a touchdown. They're the better team. They're at home, Lambeau Field. It's their home opener of the season. The Vikings, Sam Darnold, outdoors a little sketchy. They might have no TJ Hawkinson. So it's the Vikings, I just don't view on the Packers level or even close. Then they play the Colts at home, -4.5. Again, I just think the Colts are a bit overrated entering the year due to Anthony Richardson. I think their secondary is very weak against a very deep receiving core of the Packers. I think that, again, at home in Green Bay, the Packers are more than 4.5 points better than the Colts. And then at Tennessee is a little bit of a weird matchup, but honestly, like -4 on the road against Tennessee, Matt LaFleur's old team. There's a little bit of an edge there as well, but we don't really know what to expect from Will Levis. I do think that the Titans' front seven is a little bit thin, and I honestly think that the Packers could get a good pass rush on Will Levis in this game because the Titans' offensive line is still a major question mark. Again, I just still view the Packers, even if I'm raising and rising on that Titans team, I think they're more than 4 points better here than Tennessee. So the Packers make for a pretty interesting team to bet on at the start of the season. An even more interesting team, in my opinion, is the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks are one of the most undervalued, truly, and underrated teams entering 2024. And the start of their schedule could see them maybe go 4-0 or probably 3-1. They start the season -5.5 at home against Denver. Now that does seem to have lifted. That spread has definitely gone up in the last couple of months or so since it was released. But I think against a rookie quarterback in Seattle and that loud stadium and atmosphere, that is going to be a lot for a rookie quarterback in his first game in a NFL system and NFL speed. It's going to be a lot, especially against a Mike McDonald defense that is very confusing, throws a lot of different things at you, like from a communication standpoint, from a vision, reading the field standpoint. It's going to be a lot on the senses for Bo Nix. So just that fact alone, on top of Seattle being a much more talented offense compared to Denver's defense, and they're kind of revealing their new offensive scheme for the first time, which I think is going to be pretty interesting, I still think they win by a touchdown here, especially in Seattle. Then they play my Patriots in New England, which could be a bit sneaky because they have to travel from west to east, but it's the Patriots. As long as Jacoby Brissett is there with that offensive line, I think Mike McDonald is going to absolutely feast on that offense. Like, sure, the Patriots defense might give the Seahawks a bit of a tough time early in the game, but I think the Seahawks defense should be able to dominate that matchup. So only -3. I don't care that it's on the road. I'd take Seattle. Then they play the Dolphins +2.5. The Dolphins are kind of interesting, but Miami going on the road to Seattle is even more interesting, right? Like Miami with their offensive line that is not very good, not great in terms of individual talent. I feel like that could be a bit more of a struggle than people expect because the loud environment of Seattle. Again, that stadium is legit for crowd noise and just atmosphere. And when you have a bad offensive line and you're having to communicate up front with the schemes of Seattle, and you have an offense in Seattle that could win a shootout against a lot of teams, given their receiving core, Kenneth Walker in the backfield, they have a lot of explosive elements. I wouldn't be shocked if Seattle won the game outright and they're getting 2.5 points at home. So I really like that one. And then they play the Lions in Detroit +6.5 in week 4. They beat Detroit in overtime last year, and they've beaten Detroit the last couple of times in a row. So this might just be a matchup thing, but I really like Geno Smith against the Lions defense here. So yeah, I feel like 6.5, that's just too many points. I do think that the Lions probably win. They're the better team, but I wouldn't be shocked if Seattle just beat them again because they just have their number. So 6.5, that's like a lot of points for a Seahawks team that I think is better than a lot of people think. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are another team that are just straight up undervalued. They play Washington in week 1. And Washington isn't any good. But why I love the matchup is it's a rookie quarterback against Todd Bowles. And Todd Bowles' defense is very elaborate. They send a lot of different heat from a lot of different angles. And they, show blitz. They drop people. It's going to be a lot for Jane Daniels. On top of that, Todd Bowles has been very, very good against rushing quarterbacks like Jalen Hurts, for example, in the past. I think that Tampa just punishes Washington's secondary. I don't think they can cover Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I think the defense has some turnover plays that allow them to win that game. Then Tampa's plus 6.5 at Detroit, a team that they really hung in there with in the playoffs. This would be the one that I would maybe not be the most confident about just because I thought Detroit's offense really shredded Tampa's defense real good in that playoff game. So that would scare me a little bit. But I do think Tampa has the capacity to move the ball in Detroit's defense. So 6.5 is a lot of points for a playoff matchup and rematch, I should say. Then you have Tampa Bay minus 3.5 versus Denver. Again, rookie quarterback against Todd Bowles is a really difficult matchup. Denver doesn't have a crazy good defense. We've got an improved offensive line in Tampa, a plethora of weapons. So I feel like Tampa moves the ball pretty well in that game, and they're at home against a rookie quarterback in the first month of the season. They're only favored by 3.5, just as they are against Washington. And then the final game in September is against the Eagles, in which I already talked about. I do think the Eagles will probably win and cover. But again, Tampa beat the Eagles in the playoffs, and they're getting points at home in that game. So that one really could go either way. So I do think Tampa Bay, especially the games against the rookie quarterbacks, are must bets in the first month of the season. I know the Carolina Panthers are very ugly. Nobody wants to pick them. Nobody wants to bet on them, but that's why they're undervalued and they're just boosted, right? Like their point spreads are going to be absolutely egregious. Nobody wants to bet the Panthers. So the books have to make it enticing enough for you to want to bet them. So now their lines are all inflated. Like the Panthers getting 4.5 in week 1 at home against the Saints. Are you serious? 4.5 points in an NFL game in week 1 when the Panthers have a way better offensive line? Like, yeah, I'll be betting that, unfortunately, right? So the Panthers just getting too many points in a lot of these matchups. Then they play the Chargers at home, getting 3.5. The Chargers are not a very talented team. Yes, Herbert's a lot better than Bryce Young, but if you compare the rest of the rosters, both new coaching staffs, like 3 in the hook, that field goal game is very possible there. Then they play the Raiders. They're getting 4 points against the Raiders, Gardner Minshew. It's very possible that Bryce Young could be better than Gardner Minshew this year. It is possible. Their offensive line, I think the Panthers can run the ball early this season. I like their offensive line. I think their defense is a little slept on. Like, I think the Panthers will be improved. They have better receivers. They're getting 4 points in a defensive battle against the Raiders. That is a must bet. And then the Panthers, 6.5 at home, are getting 6.5 against the Bengals. Now, I said that I don't really like that one. I like the Bengals in that game. But the 3 games earlier in the season, Saints, Chargers, Raiders, they're all teams that are like equal playing field with the Panthers. And the Panthers are getting more than a field goal in every single matchup. And 2 of them are at home. So the Panthers are just egregiously mispriced. They're like way, way undervalued because they've been so bad. But honestly, like, if you believe they're going to be a little bit better than last year, you have to bet these and just kind of like hold your nose a little bit. The final team that I think is undervalued is the Tennessee Titans. I have really been rising on the Titans, especially after they traded for Ernest Jones. And that kind of, in my opinion, made their cohesive defense just at all 3 levels. You can see the vision for how they can improve there. The Titans are getting 4 or more points in every single one of their matchups to start the season. And I think it is the difference between the quarterbacks. But what if Will Levis is good? Like what we saw in the preseason, Will Levis looked real good. This offense looks a lot better, a lot more explosive. And Levis certainly showed last year that he's capable of winning shootouts and just making big throws down the field, like the Dolphins game, which, speaking of the Dolphins, they actually are getting 6.5 points at Miami in week 4, a game that they won outright last year. It was a little fluky. It was on Monday Night Football, but still 6.5 points. Look at all the improvements they made compared to Miami. Like, that's a nice game to bet. So they have that game in week 4. But to start the season, I love them against Chicago, in Chicago, getting 4.5, because Chicago's a rookie quarterback in a really hyped game for them in the first game ever with a rookie quarterback. And the Titans, they're getting 4.5 points. And I think both teams are fairly even in terms of talent. Like, both teams have great receiving cores. Their offensive lines are kind of sketchy. They both have young quarterbacks. They both have a couple running backs that I like. I like the Titans more. The defenses, I think the Bears are a little bit more certain, but the Titans do have a lot of talent. And they have one of the few secondaries that can actually cover the Bears, which is a great big deal there with L'Jarius Sneed and company. So I love the Titans in that game. They get the Jets on a short week after a Monday Night Football matchup against San Francisco. They're getting 4 points at home in their home opener. That screams upset to me. The Jets, their offense might not be good for the first month of the year. Then they play Green Bay at home. That's going to be a funky game. They're getting 4 points. Like I said, I like the Packers there, but 3 out of 4 ain't bad. I do think the Titans are undervalued to start the 2024 NFL season. Those are the 8 teams that I feel are the most egregiously mispriced and the teams to take advantage of entering 2024. These are the 8 teams that you have to bet on. Let me know in the comments if I missed a team. Let me know your take on my takes for the bets to make. Gronk, spike the like button. Don't forget to subscribe. It's Mitch. See you next time. Peace.